Depot, she is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello, dear listeners, spooks and specters, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. I bid you all good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are across the 24 time zones. My name is Jeff, and I will be your control operator, the red balloon floating in the sewer drain. That weird feeling that someone's watching you when you're home alone, when the shadows dance out of the corners of your eyes. If you have just found the Ghost Signal for the first time, I hope you like what you hear, but if you are a return listener, welcome back. This is episode 18, Don't Open Evil Inside, Part 1, in which we will visit the Tallmann family of Horicon, Wisconsin, and begin their nightmarish story way back in the 80s. We will also be creeping it real with a story from the Emerald Isle across the pond. If you like what you hear, please consider visiting theghostsignalpodcast.com, where you will find links to email me haunting tales of your own, to browse merchandise, to the Ghost Signal Patreon, and the path to the Discord server, where you can interact with me and others directly. Now, dear listeners, let's keep on creeping on.
Here's a question. Have you seen a ghost? Reports of ghost sightings and paranormal activity are on the rise this year.
It's a trend across Raleigh and the country. New at 11, CBS 17's Bridget Chapman getting answers about what it could be.
Experts say reports of paranormal activity are spiking this year. Claims of unusual noises, movements, and feelings. NAW says their emails about activity in people's homes shot up 50% in March.
A paranormal research group investigating a 12th century castle in Ireland photographed a peculiar anomaly that some believe could be a legendary shape-shifting entity said to dwell at the property. The eerie image was reportedly shared on social media earlier this month by the group Paranormal Supernatural Investigations Ireland, who explained that they captured the photo while exploring the Lackeen Castle, a centuries-old structure that is now a national monument in the country. The oddity in the image seems to resemble a face peeking out from behind a wall, though rather than suggest it was a ghost, the group offered a more folkloric possibility, theorizing that the anomaly is an entity known as a puka. They explained, "The legend goes that some old hags were stealing from a dead body when an O'Kennedy came upon them. They were defended by the puka, which was captured by O'Kennedy and taken to Lackeen Castle, where O'Kennedy's servants begged their master to let it go or else they would be cursed. While the entity was ultimately released by its captor after promising to never hurt any member of their family, the group observed that there is a local tradition which states that the puka can still be seen roaming around the castle to this day. It is that colorful bit of background that led the group to conclude that the anomaly could have been the elusive entity making a brief appearance. While skeptics will undoubtedly say that the shapeshifter is simply a trick of light and shadow, the local community is celebrating their unexpected moment in the sun as the eerie image has sparked news coverage around the world. One area media outlet expressed the hope that the spooky snapshot and its accompanying tale could spark an increase in tourism to the area, and that the surrounding communities might soon benefit from visitors seeking to spot the Lackeen puka themselves. I will put the pictures on the website under the news tab so you can judge for yourself. I personally think it's just a trick of the light or matrixing, which is where the brain tries to make order out of chaos and you see things that aren't really there, but who knows, maybe I'm being too quick to judge. But you can take a look and see for yourself. I've also been playing a game recently, and yes, I'm a gamer, I don't care. It's called The Mortuary Assistant, and holy guacamole is it good. You work overnight in a mortuary embalming cadavers, but there's a twist. A demon is attached to one of them, and in order to not become possessed yourself, you have to discover its name correctly, identify the corpse correctly, and burn the body in the incinerator before the demon takes control of you. It's very intense, quite a few jump scares, and pretty challenging. The only thing is it can get repetitive after a while, but it's brand new and the developer Brian Clark, yes, it's just one guy who made it, is still actively updating it. New scares and features are most likely forthcoming. It's on Steam for $25 if you want to check it out for yourself. In 1986, Deb and Alan Tallmann moved into their new home on South Larabee Street. At first, everything seemed like they had found their new forever home. The neighbors were friendly, the schools were good, and it all just felt right. That is, until the sun went down. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
The haunted house of legend must look the part. A Victorian one is ideal, one replete with gables and turrets, and windows heavily curtained to ward off prying eyes. A grotesquerie of gargoyles crouching along the sagging roofline adds a certain sinister ambiance, as does a weed-choked lawn encircled by a black wrought iron fence topped with elaborate scrollwork and spikes. The ancient garden gate must swing on rusted hinges. The haunt hunter should not be fooled by this portrait painted by fictionists. It is more accurate to say that even the most quiet village neighborhoods can present scenes of inexplicable terror for the innocent or unwary. The rural enclave of Horicon, Wisconsin presents such an attitude of peaceful tranquility. Peaceful, that is, until one family found their lives shattered by menacing apparitions and psychological horror. Here the vistas Norman Rockwell might have depicted are deceptive. In a ranch-style bungalow along South Larabee Street, amid the clutter of bicycles and skateboards, lawnmowers and lawn ornaments, there played out a haunting so bizarre and shocking in its effect that the entire community had an unwilling role in the story that eventually captured the attention of media around the world. It's a tale of a menacing, elusive, evil phantasm that chose an ordinary family for persecution so brutal they fled their home in the middle of an icy January night, literally escaping for their very lives. Alan and Deborah Tallmann moved their young family into the 3-bedroom home in the spring of 1986. The house was one of 10 built in the neighborhood 2 years earlier through the self-help housing project of Dodge County. The original owners of the house had moved out in less than 18 months. The Tallmanns didn't ask why, but perhaps they should have. The couple had 2 children, a boy aged 7 and a daughter not quite a year old. We will call them Kenny and Mary Ann. Deborah was pregnant and would give birth to another daughter, Sarah, in November of 1986. In every way, the Tallmanns were typical of any family in the town. Alan went deer hunting each fall with his friends. He worked hard at his job and wanted nothing more than to live in peace with his young family. Deborah devoted her attention to the children and took pride in her well-kept home. Alan qualified for a low-interest FMHA loan, and mortgage payments were small. The family figured they would have the house paid for well before retirement, but it was not to be. Their joy in buying a piece of the American dream turned into a nightmare of vaporous figures, guttural voices threatening death, phantom flames, frightened children, and finally a penetrating fear that left the family on the verge of madness. South Larabee Street is a short roadway, extending only a few blocks to the south edge of town. Until houses were built there, it was a small marsh best known as a hangout for teenagers and their occasional beer parties. The old Catholic cemetery, St. Malachy's, is 2 blocks away. The houses in the development look much the same, primarily one-story ramblers with attached garages. The dominant house color is white. There are no sidewalks. Children scamper across lawns or whiz up and down the street on bicycles while parents still visit across backyard fences. It is a safe and secure neighborhood that nearly typifies the ideal of a small-town American life. The Tallmanns seemed to fit right in. Deborah was 30 years old and Alan was 32. The first few months in their new home were uneventful. The couple spent their time painting and decorating, getting to know all their neighbors. But within a short time, Deborah and Alan began to notice changes in their home and family so subtle that only much later were they able to understand their significance. It was after a couple of months, Deb remembered. We didn't see anything and nothing unusual happened, but it seemed like our health started going downhill. I had my kids in the doctor's office at least once a week and sometimes 3. They had everything. Alan was sick too, and my Marianne was in the hospital twice, once for chickenpox and once for a cold and ear infection. Alan had back problems. We were just sick all the time. At first they thought the illnesses could be traced to building materials used in the house, but a check with building inspectors found that it was not the case. Neither asbestos nor other toxic substances were present in the house. Alan's personality too began to change. He was easily irritated, and when night fell he became itchy, in his words, and got real jittery and short-tempered. He often argued with Deborah over trivial matters. When their second daughter was born in November, he threatened to leave the family and went on a drinking binge. It was uncharacteristic behavior for him. Looking back on the episodes, he could only attribute his mean disposition to their life in the house on South Larabee Street. The house also seemed to have alarming effects on visitors, particularly Deborah's mother and sister. According to Deborah, we have real close family relationships, and when we moved in, our families would come and visit all the time. We had a brand new home and they liked coming here, but it seemed that just after a couple of months, the visits from our family, well, they just didn't want to come here. During her pregnancy, Deborah was diagnosed as having placenta previa, the mislocation of the placenta in an abnormally low position in the uterus. Deborah was confined to her home, and doctors cautioned her not to perform housework or other heavy chores. Her mother came over almost every day from August 1986 until the baby was born in November. Deborah eventually found out just how much her mother disliked their dream home. She told me after I had the baby that she couldn't wait to leave the house, and the farther she got away, the more relaxed she became. She was just so tense in the house. She would tell me it's a beautiful house, but she just didn't like it. Deborah's mother said the house was suffocating the family, causing a kind of vacuum that seemed to be sucking the life out of them. At about the same time, during the summer and early fall of 1986, Deborah's sister also stopped visiting. The reasons were the same, a smothering sensation whenever she stepped through the door. She told me she would love to come over, Deborah said, but she got headaches whenever she was in our house and actually got sick to her stomach. The Tallmanns bought a kitten they named Cat soon after they moved in. Within a few weeks, Cat went absolutely berserk, Deborah said. She would actually climb the walls. Sometimes she would come flying across the living room and climb right up a door. Once she even crashed into the wall. Cat's rude behavior seemed particularly prevalent after sunset. Alan started putting Cat in the bathroom at night, even though it would howl. One night, however, he decided to leave Cat out on the living room couch. That was a mistake. A couple of hours later, Alan Tallmann recalled, Cat came running across the bed. Deborah had a chest of drawers and a TV set up on top with a cable box on it. The cat jumped straight up to the cable TV box. The cat then sprang for the wall. It was hanging right on the plaster walls just like an owl. The couple found a new home for Cat within a few days. Not long after Cat's antics, another more perplexing incident still left the couple unconvinced that the strange behavior by those who visited or lived in the house on Larabee Street was anything out of the ordinary. Deborah and Alan wanted a night out before their next baby was born. Even more than they wanted to admit, the sickness of their 2 children, the attitudes of the in-laws, Alan's changing conduct, and the problems with Cat were beginning to weigh upon the couple. They just wanted to get away from everything just for a few hours. They hired a babysitter, a girl of 16 who had babysat for them before, and made plans to dine at a favorite restaurant in nearby Beaver Dam. The evening was pleasant and relaxing, a welcome respite from the growing tension of the past few months. Their serene evening ended abruptly when they returned home and opened their front door. The babysitter rushed to meet them. She blurted out a fantastic story that left Alan and Deborah dumbfounded, yet understandably skeptical. While the babysitter and 7-year-old Kenny played a board game in the kitchen, a chair at the table started rocking back and forth. It bounced around and then suddenly stopped. The girl was shaken by the incident, yet neither Deborah nor her husband really knew how to respond. I just looked at Alan. We didn't want to say she was lying, so we just kind of brushed it off as, well, maybe it did and maybe it didn't, Deborah said. The girl was from a good family and had never said anything even remotely as amazing as the tale she reported that night. Young Kenny Tallmann corroborated the girl's story when his parents questioned him the next morning. He was as upset as the babysitter at the incident. The household returned to a semblance of normalcy over the next 6 months. Deborah gave birth to Sarah in November. Alan went deer hunting with friends, and both tried to adjust to the pattern of life with a new baby. The children made new friends in the neighborhood. Kenny was in school most of the day, so little Marianne tried to help Mom as best she could with the new baby. In mid-1987, the parents decided 7-month-old Sarah could begin sharing a room with her big sister. Kenny had been sleeping in the larger of the 2 children's bedrooms. He moved into the smaller one, and the girls were given bunk beds in Kenny's older bedroom. He moved into the smaller room, and the girls were given bunk beds in Kenny's old bedroom. For whatever reason, the room switched by the children triggered a new round of increasingly violent incidents. On the same day we moved Kenny into the room where Marianne had been sleeping, we had put a clock radio in there, one with a sleeper alarm, Deborah Tallmann remembered. He had gone to bed with the radio on so it would go off when he went to sleep. He came out after a while and said the radio had switched stations. We thought maybe the radio had picked up some static, or another station had come in, something along those lines. We didn't make too much of it. Deborah took Kenny by the hand and led him back into the room. She tucked him in, tuned to a radio station, checked the sleep timer, and left the room. Kenny came running back out a few minutes later. The radio had changed stations, only this time Kenny said he saw the knob turn and the tuning indicator spin across the dial. Deborah and Alan had no way of verifying what Kenny saw, but they saw he was very frightened, and they believed him. He was usually a pretty reliable little boy. To placate her son, Deborah moved the radio from his room and put it in the front closet. Deborah feared this would add to Kenny's growing irritability. He frequently refused to go to his room alone at bedtime, and rarely slept through the night. He heard noises, he said, like someone was banging on the water pipes in the basement. Maybe, his mother reasoned, the pressures of a new school, new neighborhood, and a new sister were causing him to feel some resentment. Deborah had given birth to Kenny before she met and married Alan. Although the boy spent some time with his natural father, the two weren't particularly close. We thought maybe this was his way of getting some more attention, Deborah said. A second episode involving a small suitcase stowed under Kenny's bed did nothing to dispel his mother's belief that perhaps he was making up stories to get attention. Kenny had again fought going to his room that night. After the by now usual kicking and screaming, Kenny had calmed down enough for his parents to turn off the lights and go back into the living room. A few minutes later, Kenny came running out crying that the suitcase had slid out from underneath his bed. It had zoomed across the floor and then scooted back. Deborah refused to believe him. That just couldn't possibly have happened, she scolded him. She thought he just wanted to stay up late and watch television. Kenny insisted that he had seen the suitcase move, and Deborah put him back in bed. When in a short time he ran out repeating the same story, Alan grabbed the suitcase, which was under the bed, and tossed it into the same closet where the radio had been stored. All 3 children had disturbing nighttime experiences during the summer and early fall of 1987. Our kids rarely slept straight through the night from the day we moved into that house, Deborah said. We were up all the time with them. It almost seemed that whatever was in that house would wake up the kids. We could go in and check them and they'd be sound asleep, and then all of a sudden they'd be crying or fussing. It always seemed to happen about the time we'd crawl into bed. We'd no more than get into bed and the kids would be awake, and they'd stay awake for a long time. Sometimes her parents heard Marianne, who was now nearly 2.5 years old, talking to someone. Deborah said we'd wake up in the middle of the night to hear her giggling and talking. We never really thought that much about it. We believed she was talking to the doll or her teddy bear or whatever. She and Alan joked that their daughter seemed to be having her own little tea party. Any lightheartedness they felt at Marianne's nocturnal ramblings soon ended, however. The girl's odd conversation soon gave way to nightmares that sent her running to her parents' room. She would get to our room and talk about the noises she heard, Deborah said. She'd say, "Don't you hear it?" And we didn't know what it was. She would make the sound shh, 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 like it was a voice. A voice trying to quiet a frightened child? Oddly, all three children were rarely awake at the same time. When one woke up with a nightmare, the other two remained asleep. While Marianne babbled away, Sarah, in the same room, would not be disturbed. Kenny's separate room kept his own nighttime problems from affecting the girls and vice versa. Until September 1987, the peculiar episodes came in irregular patterns. For several days in a row, the children would have restless nights, or Deborah and Alan would fight over minor incidents. Then the household returned to normal for a week or so before a new trauma struck the family. Deborah never heard voices, but there were other peculiar occurrences. I heard the garage door open and close. I thought maybe somebody had come in over the fence and went in the back door because we had a freezer full of meat in the garage. I called up the neighbor next door and said I thought somebody was in the garage and asked her to hang on to the phone while I went to look. There was nobody out there, but the garage door had been opened and shut. I heard it. Violent nightmares also became a problem for Deborah. Like most people, she occasionally had dreams vivid enough to wake her up, but after her move to South Larabee Street, her nightmares became so violent they made her think she was going mad. I had them all the time in the house, one right after the other. I'd wake up in the middle of the night crying, and I'd ask Alan if I was going to have nightmares like this all my life. They would be terrible and ungodly. I would dream my kids were dying, that Alan was dying, and my father would die. People would come up from the basement and line us up along the walls and just shoot us all down. Or people would kidnap my kids, or they would just fall into the river and drown, over and over again. People were going to hurt us. Deborah can't explain or understand what caused this onslaught of terror-filled dreams, only that they seemed to worsen the longer she lived in the house. The long nights of soothing their frightened children frazzled the couple's already taut nerves. Only Alan seemed capable of bringing comfort to the children. He would lie on the floor of the girls' room until they settled down, then go into Kenny's room until he fell asleep. I heard the banging when I was in there, Alan said, referring to the noises Kenny had earlier complained about. I told the kids it was the water heater. I went down to the basement a lot of times with running hot water upstairs to get the water heater to kick in. You could hear a couple of little plinks and hear the humming from the burner, but the noises I heard the nights I spent in Kenny's room, well, it was like mice or rats or something crawling around. But investigate as they might, the couple never found evidence of rodents. According to the couple, the house was extremely well insulated. Alan looked through the low attic, checked around the foundation and in the floorboards for any signs that animals had somehow gotten inside. Eventually, he dismissed the idea altogether. For all the problems the family was facing, Deborah rarely discussed the situation with her husband. We never talked about the fact that maybe something was going on. I fought it, Alan said. I fought it all the time. Deborah thought there was something in our house, but I didn't go for that at first. We used to have some pretty bad arguments, but we never really sat down and talked about it, Deborah added. I mean, we just sat down and said this is happening, now what are we going to do about it? Never did we talk about it until the vague feelings of uneasiness, increasingly cranky children, and family tensions gave way to a number of events with one thing in common. They could not be attributed to the imagination. When the weather started getting cooler, late in September of 1987, Alan Tallmann started painting the concrete walls in the basement. It is a finished basement, but only used by Deborah for her washer and dryer and as a playroom for the children. The couple had plans to partition the area into a couple of extra rooms. By now it had become routine for Alan to stay in the girls' room, stretched out on the floor reading stories until their steady breathing told him they were asleep. One night in the early fall, Deborah asked him to come upstairs, Alan recalled, so he could get the children off to sleep. I took the paintbrush and I laid it right across the paint tray. I was upstairs probably a half an hour or 45 minutes at the most. I told Deb I was going to go back down and paint just a little bit more. It was around 9:30. Now up until this point, I wasn't scared in the house. Nothing bothered me. Well, I went downstairs and my paintbrush had been pulled out of the pan and was jammed upside down in a can of paint. Alan was dumbstruck. The brush was propped absolutely upright, the wooden handle completely immersed in the epoxy paint, like a prankster had placed it there. He hadn't left it that way, but that was the only thing he knew for certain. I didn't say anything. I asked Deb to throw down some towels. I told her I must have knocked the paintbrush into the can, but I didn't know it. I cleaned the paintbrush off and painted a little while longer. A few minutes later, he glimpsed a shadow flitting across the basement. He thought it might have been a passing car's lights throwing silhouettes across the walls and furnace, because the basement window faced the street, but he wrapped up for the night and headed upstairs. A kind of chill went through my spine. That was enough painting for one night, he decided, telling Deborah what had happened. Another odd incident in the basement almost made the couple believe that it was a prankster and not the supernatural out to harm them. Alan found one of the basement windows removed and propped against the wall one morning. Deborah said the window was just like it had been slid down, almost like someone had gone into the basement and set it there and crawled back out. We thought somebody had broken into our house. If someone had kicked it in, it would have fallen and crashed. We were home the night before, so we would have heard it. Alan had a valuable collection of hunting rifles, power tools, and a chainsaw in the basement, but nothing appeared to have been taken. They didn't even call the police. What we couldn't figure out, Deborah said, is if somebody broke in, how did they get from that high up down to the floor? Because they would have had to scoot through the window and jump down. That's okay, I guess. But in order to get back out, they would have had to climb on a chair or something. It was real puzzling, but we just put the window back and let it go. Deborah admits that after the window incident, a certain paranoia took hold, an almost palpable sense that the family was being watched. She rarely went to the basement alone. It would be very warm outside, but we would close all the windows and lock them. We just wouldn't leave them open because we were afraid somebody was going to come in. The family bought a dog to help foster a sense of security. It was a young German Shepherd Labrador mix that they were mistakenly told had been housebroken, and that wasn't the only problem they had with him. The dog barked all night and it messed in the house. The first night we had him there, I had to send it outside to the fenced-in yard. The dog barked at the house, especially when it was night. All day long it would be in the kennel, but as soon as the sun started to set, the dog would pace back and forth barking. It just wouldn't shut up. We tried to discipline it. We would bring it into the house, but it just went crazy, scratching at the door wanting to go out. But if you let it outside, it would just start barking again. We couldn't keep it in and we couldn't keep it out. Unlike the cat, the dog stayed with the family. The barking problem subsided somewhat with training, although he remained edgy in the house after dark. The Tallmanns found out later that other neighborhood dogs often barked at their house for no apparent reason. In October 1987, Alan Tallmann was promoted to foreman on the night shift at the manufacturing plant where he worked. Deborah wasn't looking forward to the prospect of being alone with the children until Alan returned at 1 or 2 in the morning. Later in October, Alan became sick with a severe sinus infection and cold. He took medicine, but nothing seemed to improve his condition. The frequent trips with their sick children to the doctor over the past months had been expensive, even with the family's insurance covering part of the cost. Alan was reluctant to seek medical treatment for himself. One night at about 10 o'clock, however, his condition worsened. I had taken a shower and crawled into bed, Alan remembered. I was sleeping when I started coughing and then threw up. I got real short of breath. Deborah called Alan's mother in a panic. She came right over and said she would watch the children while Deborah took Alan to the hospital. He was worse by this time. He had a difficult time catching his breath. Deborah was concerned over her husband's deteriorating condition and called an ambulance. Hospital personnel stabilized Alan's condition, gave him medication, and sent him home with Deborah a few hours later. Alan's mother met the couple at the door, purse and car keys in hand, ready to leave. After a perfunctory inquiry into her son's health, she hurried out. The couple was startled at her rather brusque manner, but they thought she was simply tired from a long day. However, a telephone conversation sometime later between Alan and his mother indicated another reason entirely for her rudeness. I asked her if she got a funny feeling when she was at our house because it didn't seem like she wanted to visit us anymore, Alan said. His mother hesitated momentarily and then admitted that yes, she didn't enjoy coming over at all, and in fact couldn't wait to leave whenever she was there. She had been especially upset the night Alan went to the hospital. That night she was lying on the couch after the kids had gotten settled down and dozed off, Helen said. Then it seemed like somebody woke her up. She said there were red eyes looking in the window. She blinked and couldn't believe what she was seeing. She looked again and they were still there. The couch Mrs. Tallmann napped on was directly beneath the living room's wide front window. When she sat up, the staring eyes vanished. Mrs. Tallmann thought someone was looking in through the window, according to her son. The only thing that crossed my mind, Deborah Tallmann offered, is that a car might have driven in the driveway directly across from us. But then she had gone to the window and looked out and she didn't see anybody. You'd think she would have seen the neighbors getting out of their car. Whatever it was, Alan's mother had been very happy to see her son and daughter-in-law return home that night. Mrs. Tallmann's description of the red glowing eyes turned out to be prophetic. The devilish image was to return on several occasions over the next few months. Tune in to the next episode for the continuation of the story, dear listener, because things are just warming up. And that's it for episode 18. If you've made it all the way to the end, you have my sincerest gratitude, dear listener. With the paranormal podcast market as oversaturated as it is, it's pretty difficult to get noticed. But if you like what you hear, please spread the word. Visit the website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, to drop me a line, get into the Discord server, or check out the Ghost Signal Patreon. The Ghost Signal is executively produced by Jason Wilson, Patreon by Brooks Bigley, creative direction by Cassie, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, video editing by Hale, and I'm your ghost host with the most, Control Operator Jeff. Next time on the Ghost Signal is the rest of the story. Until then, dear listeners, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.